For more on this, Adam Hancock joins me now live from Singapore. Adam, President Macron is hoping that he can persuade President Xi Jinping to use his influence over Russia to try and secure peace in Ukraine. So how are we expecting the French leader to approach these talks?
Well, we really expect him to try and turn on the diplomatic charm and do everything he can, really, to get President Xi to go and speak to Russia and try and broker some kind of deal. It's a difficult position, really, for President Macron. Many aren't holding out much hope for him succeeding in this, really, given that China have shown very little willingness to get Ukraine and Russia around the negotiating table. There are concerns about the Chinese position on that conflict in Ukraine. Obviously, there have been very friendly meetings between President Putin and President Xi, but we have had no conversations yet since the war in Ukraine started between President Xi and President Zelensky. And really, President Macron has very little leverage in terms of trying to persuade President Xi to go and speak to Russia and try and get some sort of peace deal. So it's certainly a difficult task for him. From the talks today, it seemed they went fairly well in terms of reopening relations between France and China following the pandemic. We obviously just heard President Xi there mentioning about how he's calling for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. But it does seem that so far there's no breakthrough in terms of trying to encourage China to do more with their relationship with Russia in order to get a peaceful outcome to this conflict.
But Adam, China has been somewhat trying to mediate the conflict, but analysts believe their support for Russia is stronger. A show of that is, for example, them failing to mention that Russia must retract its soldiers from Ukrainian soil in their peace plan. So where exactly does China stand in all of this?
Yeah, well, officially, they are neutral. That's been their position ever since the conflict first started. They said they are neutral on it and they want a peaceful resolution. But as you mentioned there, there's lots of skepticism about that. Remember, they have never actually condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They've never come out and called them out for it. And as I mentioned, there's been no conversation between the Ukrainian side and President Xi. Also, there are these concerning reports, or reports that are causing a lot of concern in Europe, at least, that China is considering providing weapons to Russia. And many in Europe really see China as kind of holding the balance in the way that this conflict goes. If they go one way and they decide to provide weapons to Russia, a claim, by the way, which Beijing has strongly denied, but many fear that if they do back Russia with military assistance, then that would really escalate this conflict. And that's something that everyone in Europe is very keen to avoid. But on the other hand, they still see China as having a pivotal role in bringing a peaceful end to this conflict. But so far, we've seen very little indication that China are going to get both sides around. Obviously, they're touting themselves at the moment as a bit of a global peacemaker. We've seen them doing deals between Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example. So a lot of these European leaders are trying to test China out on these new claims, China trying to step in and play the role of global peacemaker. But so far, they have not managed to negotiate a situation where we've got Russia and Ukraine around the table discussing how they would end this conflict.
And Adam, before I let you go, just help us understand what would be the benefits for the European Union and for China in recreating a relationship.
Well, I think they're both very important trading partners. Many of the major European economies rely heavily on China. You only have to look in Germany, one of the biggest economies in the EU. Their automotive industry is heavily reliant on China. So as much as European countries are very careful when dealing with China, particularly because of the very tense situation between the US and China overall at the moment, they understand that they are a vital trade and investment partner. And that's why President Macron has taken 50 business delegates over to Beijing with him. From a Chinese perspective, they're always keen to maintain a strong relationship with Europe. They're obviously well aware of how closely aligned the EU and the US are on the war in Ukraine. So they're keen really to speak to European leaders and put their point of view forwards. So on the world stage, it's important for China to maintain good relations with Europe.
That's Adam Hancock for us in Singapore. Adam, thank you very much indeed.